Hello. In this video, we're going to show how to use Boundary Builder to create a simple boundary within a Unity scene and then place prefabs automatically along that boundary. So first of all, I have the Boundaries editor window open, but if you don't, it's available on the Tools menu, Boundary Builder, and then I like to dock it here by the scene view. Right, so when I add a new boundary, it's going to create a file for me. And that's added underneath the boundary data folder, and you'll have a data file and a mesh file. So those are in order to keep the data consistent between scenes, so everything is not tied to the scene. So if you delete this game object from the scene, if you just click add again and then type the name of your asset, the data asset here, it will load automatically back into the scene with the same settings that you had. So the nodes that are defining the boundary are placed by choosing a collision layer, and the collision layer will just detect from within the scene view where I'm placing nodes. And that's going to just stay default in this situation because in my scene I have got a mesh collider that the floor is on the default layer. So I want to place the boundary around this warning tape here. So I'm going to select the boundary, and then I'm going to click Add Nodes to enable the Add Nodes mode. And then within the scene view, I can just click, get that here, and that will just begin placing nodes around wherever I click. I'm going to disable adding nodes, and then click the looped here to close the loop. If you made any errors and if you want to just do some fine-tuning, you can enable draw handles, and that will enable the translation handles, and then just drag the nodes. Rotation handles will show rotation instead, and that will rotate the mesh. Let me make it a little bit shorter so we can see that. So that will rotate each node out. But for this situation, I'm just going to leave it like this, and I'm going to click Save to make sure that my Mesh Collider and Mesh Renderer components are up to date with each other and with the object. Now I need to add prefabs. So I prepared a couple prefabs. This one is a kind of a medium-sized rail that would be placed somewhere like this, and then a smaller one that I'd like to place in between these spaces. So the only requirement for prefabs is that they have a box collider at the root element of the object, and that is to ensure that they don't collide with each other or intersect with each other as they're being placed along the boundary. So when I select the boundary, I come here into the prefab section. I'm going to add two prefab references, and I'm just going to drag and drop each one of them into the slots here. So this boundary control has some controls that are pretty self-explanatory. Reverse normals is going to reverse the sides of the mesh. Clear is going to clear all the nodes, and this slider takes up and down size of the nodes. So I'm going to just minimize that for now, and we're going to look at the prefab placement. Placement types, there's two of them. Best fit is just a pretty straightforward way of placing prefabs in between nodes. The post and fill will give each prefab a location type of post or fill, and if it's post, it will place that prefab at the node location exactly, and then if it's fill, it will fill it in between nodes. So for this situation, I'm going to use best fit, and point to point is used to determine the kind of rotation or the kind of look direction of each prefab. If it's set to collision layer, it will use this collision layer here to do its best to place the prefab in sitting on top of that layer wherever it gets placed. And for this situation, I'm just going to use point to point because otherwise it's just going to place it along the line in between two nodes. Selection determines how among the list of prefabs that I have on the boundary, how those prefabs are selected. So a random selection obviously is just random. It will just pick whichever random one, and then it will place it, and then it will look at the remaining distance in the node, and it will just find another random one that fits there. So that's random. Efficient will choose try to fit as least amount of prefabs in between two nodes as possible. So it will choose the largest largest prefab, that will fit first, and then look at the remaining distance, and then find the largest prefab that will fit in that remaining distance, all the way until it cannot find any prefabs that will fit. The prefab collider selection, if it's set to delete, and you remember when I had these box colliders at the root level, a lot of times they're just not needed. They're only really needed for placing the prefab. They can be useful in general if you wanted to have it be a trigger and have a script applied to this, or actually have this interact with physics. But for my situation, and for in some situations, you just want to have that collider for the placement of the prefab using this tool. So if that's the case, then you can set it to delete. So when the prefab is instantiated in the scene, it will be deleted. That box collider will be deleted. You can also set it to trigger, or you can have it be just no action taken, and it will just leave it alone. Follow node rotation will, if you have a rotated node, something like this, then it will try to place that prefab in a rotation as close to that as possible. And we can look at that here. If I just click place prefabs, then it will just find a prefab for between each node and just place them and space them as it can. So obviously, since I had that follow node rotation checked, then it made that one here, it tries to follow that rotation. So if I take that off and then place them again, then it will just place it up and down. It just follows that there. So that's pretty much the general setup of the prefabs. They get reinstantiated, but they still keep their prefab instances per se. They are not actual prefab instances, but they do have their parents. So I found that when instantiating a large number of prefabs and keeping their references, seeing as though this tool is very useful for having large expansive scenes and creating many prefabs at the same time, then for some reason that all of a sudden became very low performant. It really killed the editor, and so I'm not quite sure what the limitation. I mean, maybe Unity fixed that at some point, but I did come up with a solution that will allow you to make changes to the prefabs once they've already been set. So for example here, I'll just grab one of these prefabs, and so that is one of the other nice things is once you've placed them into the scene, like say I wanted this one to be laying down, like I wanted to have it be just a little bit different, then it's still in being tracked. If I click place prefabs again, it obviously will make it standing back up. But if I wanted to say make a change to the material, or if I wanted to add something to this prefab, then for example I'll just create a cube and we'll add it to the prefab just to make a small change, just to know that a change has been done. So I'm going to add that to the prefab and then click apply. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, is that they are not actual prefab instances, so when I apply it doesn't immediately take effect. But if you select the boundary and you go to update prefab references on the prefab that I've just modified, then it will find all of the prefabs within the scene and will update them to be their most recent version of the prefab parent. So again, it is that they still retain their positions, rotations, and scales within the scene. It just kind of reinstantiates the prefab as it sees fit. So if I were to just delete that again and do apply and then update the references again, then we're back to what was before. So that's the general gist of that. There are some other features when it comes to object manipulation that I found. These are specifically, again, useful for large open world terrains where you're placing like maybe trees, or maybe you're creating a fence along, along ranch or something outside, and so it allows you to randomize things and along that path. So these controls are for that, and you can also select. If I wanted to select all of the smaller ones, you can do a select all, and that will find all of those types within the scene, and then that's useful for these two because they're applied to any of the selected objects within the scene. You can do this with any objects really, like the settle objects is very useful for just placing an object on top of another object. So like this battering ram here, I'm not sure if this is gonna work out, but it should if I set it to collision layer default, and if I settle this object, then it just finds its collision with whatever this layer is on the ground there. And you can also, when you do an orient to normal, if there was uneven terrain, it finds the normal of that terrain, and it would position this guy on top of the terrain. So there's some cool things there. You can play with those. You can rescale objects randomly. So if I wanted to have maybe I wanted this guy and this, to be random scale, you can do between these values here. So maybe I take this down and have maybe between 1 and 4. So that'll just give you a way to kind of randomly scale. Again, it's really nice with larger amounts of objects. So you can grab the ones that you want to work on from your boundary, and then maybe randomize their scale, right? Or you can randomize their Y position up and down, or randomize their Y rotation. Again, a lot of this is useful for like racetracks, or when you're just want to place a bunch of objects along some lines. So yeah, any questions, let me know. My email will be in the description, and if you have any suggestions, be sure to let me know. Thanks.